Hey there everybody, this is Caitlin here, and today we have another Force of Will deck profile video, and obviously you can tell from the title of this video and the ruler that we have right in front of us is going to be Reflect Refrain. Now, I've seen all the time people arguing about Reflect Refrain, or RR as people more commonly call it, arguing whether it's broken, whether it's too good, whether it should be banned, whether, it's oversaturating like tournaments and stuff, because you always see when people like post up from tournaments and AGPs and stuff that Reflect Refrain is like in the top 8 for every single deck. And I don't know, I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. I'm not like that super like meta player who will just build one deck and only use that because apparently it won things or whatever. I like to play like with a variety of different decks and try different styles out before I decide like what I prefer to play with. And I don't like to go with like what people would think is like the norm. I like to try out my own ideas and stuff. So like this kind of build for Reflect Refrain, I wouldn't say it's like going to win any tournaments. I'd say that it can consistently play, and it has its fair share of wins and losses. It's kind of like an updated version of my Reflect Refrain Elves that you saw in one of my previous matchup videos. I think it was the one against Dark Alice or whatever. So there's been a couple of changes to it, not too many ones, just a couple of additions since Moonlight Savior came out. I felt like one of the main things about the deck that kind of like suffered or whatever is that there wasn't like a big kind of beefy resonator that could like deal really big damage or whatever, because mostly it's running elves. Elves are good in their own right, but there's not like that one, say like one elf resonator that is just like totally beefy. Like it's no 12 apostle or something like that. It's no Valentina puppet monarch, or it's no celestial wing seraph. So the main idea of this deck is that we're going to try and swarm it as much as we can with elves. We're going to be doing some ramping for Will, using our various elves and such, and we're going to, combine all their power into one beefy resonator to deal for huge damage. Now, I don't really think I need to explain what Reflect Refrain does. It's just like, if you've been playing Force of Will now, you know what this thing does. You can tap and put counters on it and whatever. You can flip it to the other side, and it does things by removing counters on it and everything. I feel like there's no really need to explain Reflect Refrain. The main thing that we're using Reflect Refrain for is that we're tapping it to either buff for 200, or we're doing it to fix our hand by drawing a card and putting one back. Or, we're flipping it and we're going to be using those counters to, do stuff like returning resonators to their hand, or cancelling a target normal spell and stuff like that. That's the main highlight of like Reflect Refrain decks. And I feel like people who complain about Reflect Refrain are maybe not focusing on the real reason why like it's being run or whatever. A lot of people complain that it's the ruler. A lot of time I see that people complaining it's actually just Reddit in general that is the problem. But I digress. This video is not about arguing about the merits or the pains of RR. Going into the actual deck itself, you'll obviously see that mostly we're going to be running elves. We've got 2 1-drops in this deck, 4 of which are the Servant of Reflect. I was actually quite surprised when Reflect first dropped. There seemed to be a lot of like support in terms of supporting Reflect, but then in all the decks that kind of came out afterwards, it was just like they didn't really utilize any of the resonators that seemed to work well with Reflect. They seemed to go like for other stuff, like Red Aggro with Lancelot and such. But I kind of quite like this resonator because it's a 1-drop, it's an elf, 200, and this card gets plus 100 for each 2 magic counters on your J ruler. And you can remove a magic counter from your J ruler, and you can return this card to your hand. So basically, this thing gets buffed, depending on how many how many counters that you have on Reflect Refrain. Which, once you're combining it with the power of the orb or whatever that changes the world or whatever, which is the essential regalia for this deck anyway, it's, you can beef this thing up like to a considerable amount, especially with some other cards that we have in this deck. And the only other 1-drop that we have for this deck is pretty much the essential thing for like a green deck that is using elves and we're bumping up for extra will, is Elvish Priest. It's 100, 400. The only sad thing about it is like kind of susceptible to thunders, but because we're kind of nearing, not nearing, but because we're getting closer to rotation time, I think a lot of people aren't actually running thunders in their builds. That's what I've been seeing anyway. I've not really been seeing anyone playing thunders. So they're probably going to be using other means of getting rid of it. But, for a turn 1, we can at least get another green addition for our turn 2. So Elvish Priest is still a pretty good drop, I think, like for activating and getting green. Going into the 2-drops, we have 4 elves. I think this is actually quite a really good card. we have the Wiseman of Winds, which for a 2-drop is at 800, 600. Its only downside is that when it enters, you need to have an elf in control, otherwise you have to banish it. But because like our turn 1 is probably either going to be Servant or Elvish Priest, we don't really need to worry about not having an elf in the field. Like, presuming that our opponent didn't somehow remove it with like a 1-drop spell or something like that, we're probably going to have our elf, our turn 1 elf still in play. So we can easily like drop this for an 800 attack, which is insane for like a 2-drop Resonator. And a new addition that you probably didn't see in this deck since Moonlight Savior came out is that we're going to have Servant to the Sacred Moon, which is another 2-drop. It's a 600, 500, so it's just out of Thunder. Well, I think it's actually still in Thunder's range, but what you can do is you can pay 1 Moonwell, and you can give this card plus 400 defense. So if like they are going to Thunder it, you can just say, hold on, I'm going to pay a Moonwell, and I'm going to give it another 400, so you're not touching it. Which, I don't know if like you'd have that moon slot still open or whatever on turn 2 or whatever, but it's still a possibility. Like, say if you've spent 1 of the green with the Elvish Priest, and you've still got maybe a moon left or whatever. Plus, it's 600 attack, so it's not too bad for a turn drop as well. Not as good as, say, Wiseman of Winds, but, it's still a decent 2-drop. The only other 2-drop that we're running is going to be Familiar of Refrain. I know it's not an elf, but it's one of the ones that work well with Reflect Refrain. If magic counters would be put on your J-Ruler, you can put them in 8+1 instead. That's really the only reason we're running this, which is why we're only running 2. Plus it's a 500, so it's mainly going to be there for blocking or just getting those additional counters on RR. Also, I kind of made this comment to my boyfriend, but what is it with the Twilight Wanderer, and it came out with like loads of birds that couldn't fly? Like, I know a lot of like the evolution beasts or whatever, they were birds, but like most of them couldn't gain access to fly or had to have counters on them just to get fly. I don't know what was up with like Force of Will and like making birds that can't fly. I feel really bad for them. It's like they've got clipped wings or something. But going into our 3-drops now, and we're running 3 of another new Resonator to this deck, which is the Timekeeper Elf. And I totally adore this card, mainly for its art, and also for its effect. For a 3-drop, I know it's 500 for 100, which may seem bad for, like, say, a 3-drop, but when it enters our field, we can put the top card of our Magic Stone area, of our Magic Stone deck, into the Magic Stone area rested. So essentially, we play it, we get an additional stone that we can't use for that turn, but we can make use of the next turn when it comes out. Plus, it's good for just blocking or whatever. Plus, I also just adore it. And with one of our other Resonators, we know that it's going to get a little bit of a buff at least, so it's not too vulnerable. And the other one with a buff that we're going to have is another 3-drop of ours, which is Fina, the silver player. Now, this card is really, the only thing that we're really using it for is for its second effect, which is other elves that you control gain 400 400. We're obviously not running Christy as the J-Ruler. I feel like Christy, she is really good with, like, obviously an elf build, but because, like, her main thing is going against werewolves and vampires, which I've not seen a lot of play recently. Like, pretty much nobody's really running werewolves or vampires nowadays, so, like, yeah, kind of matchup is just not favourable. So I feel like, she's still making good use in this deck in that she's giving all the other elves 400 400. She's saving them from, like, thunder range and such. And even, like, if you get, like, a second one out, then she's getting a buff as well. So she'll be at 800 800. So she'll be safe to give all our other Resonators buffs. And the only other 3-drop that we're running right now is we're running 4 of Spellweaver Elf. This is like a godsend for like Reflect Refrain, because when this one enters, you can put 3 magic counters on your J-Ruler. Add that with like the Servant of Refrain, or not the Servant, the Familiar of Refrain. Refrain, I can't even speak. Like, saying that so many times is like ridiculous. But you could get another counter on it. So this is like the best use of getting counters on it. You could just like put this down and bam, we've got 3 more counters. I mean, I've had matches where, like, I've managed to get, like, maybe 20 odd counters on my ruler at any given time, just, like, through the use of, like, summoning Resonators, using the orb, and all this such. And, it's a 600, which is pretty good, and if it's getting the buff from Fina, then it's easily at 1000, which is pretty nice. But the big beefy Resonator that I was talking about, which I was debating about what to put in this, to, like, to try and, like, bump up the, like, attack power of this deck, I decided on Marybell, and I'm only running 2 because it's a 5-drop. But with some of the kind of like ramping that we can get from some of our elves, we can easily get to 5 quite quickly. And like because of that, we need to pay 1 in order to give its effect of like adding damage from our different elves and such. But if we drop it, none of our stuff here has swiftness, so we don't need to worry about like dropping it and immediately having to pay the cost for giving it extra power. We can wait until the next turn when we've got like 5 will open, and we can just like hammer away and just buff Marybell up, like assuming we've managed to keep our huge field. And obviously she has Pierce, so even if they block, they are going to have to think carefully about what they want to block with to soak up as much damage as they can, because the rest of it is going to be hitting their life. And we're only running it at 2, because I feel like if we ran it at more at 3, we'd be too likely to just draw them in, and ideally we only want to get like draw 1 and then drop that, but like if we draw the 2 of them, then there's no loss there. But, at the same time, it's just like, we really don't need more than 2, considering that the main idea of this deck is to use elves. As I said before, there's only 1 Regalia in this deck. I did originally have, I think I had bows in this deck, and I took them out because they just weren't doing anything. Like I said, I feel like bows only work well if you're running them with Arla, because you're going to get the most counters out of them. So the only Regalia we're running in this deck is the Orb of Illusion, which is to change the world. If you've run Refrain before, you probably already know what this does. We tap it and we can do all crazy stuff, like put on a counter. We can remove a counter from our ruler and it can restand essentially. And we can pay a green and tap this and remove 2 magic counters, and we can draw a card. So it's got like a couple of versatile effects. The most versatile one I find is that we can recover our ruler. If we want to like do more stuff with it, or we want to like do additional things with removing counters on our opponent's turn and stop them from doing stuff. Now, in terms of like additions and spells and stuff, I was contemplating running a lot more spells, but then I figured this is kind of like I'm trying to think of the right kind of term to call this deck. I wouldn't say it's like a swarm deck, because we've got like a lot of things that are like low cost, and maybe they don't seem like that threatening on their own, but they build up to like a big threat. So like I've got like a really small amount of spells. I'm contemplating adding like a couple more, because I wasn't quite sure about it. But one of the ones that I did really want to include was one of the new ones, which is Rhythm of Life, which I totally adore this card. Because for 3 cost, we can give a Resonator 800, and when this card is put into the graveyard from your field, we can put it back into our hand. So essentially, I'm only running 3 of it because we're always going to get it into our hand if we manage to attach to something. So running 4 seems a bit pointless when we can easily get it back. Plus 800, imagine if we stick that on the Marybell would essentially always swing for 2,000, which is insane. And considering that like life points start at 4,000 in this game, like if we managed to swing twice with that pumped up Marybell, it would be pretty insane. In terms of other spells that we have, I'm running 2 of the Sprint of the Beast Lady. This is mainly just like, to give everyone that extra buff. If we're going to just go for a full frontal assault, like say we don't get the Marybell out or something like that, we can just buff everyone up to heck and then just go out for full swings. Ideally, our opponent maybe won't have that big a field, or they're maybe choosing not to block and they're just letting the damage go through. So, we're kind of like lulling them into a false sense of security. Like, yeah, this turn they're totally buffed up, and like maybe next turn they won't be as buffed up. But, we can swing in for that huge damage, and, I quite like Sprint of the Beast Lady. Mainly, I love its art more than anything. And the last kind of, like, spell that's in the main deck, whatever, or addition, I suppose, because it's technically an addition, we have Wind-Secluded Refuge, which, if you don't know, everyone's hyped up this card mainly because of, like, all the crazy things it can negate. So, if you don't know what it does, essentially, when it enters the field, we can draw a card. And when a spell or ability our opponent controls targets one of our Resonators, we can banish this card and we can cancel that spell or ability. Which, excuse me, is like a godsend, considering there's a lot of spells that specifically target things. So, like, we can negate that, essentially, and, it is pretty nice. For just a 2 cost, and we get to draw a card, we can essentially say, you're going to do something that targets it, we can banish it, and get rid of it. Originally, in my other build, I was running Refarth, the Heavenly Castle, but I decided to change it because, it was giving plus 100 to everything, but at the same time, it was just like, it isn't even really worth the buff, considering the cost of it or whatever. Going into our Magic Stone deck, it's not really complicated. We're not running like several different stones or whatever, because as you can see, it's a mono green build, so we don't really need a lot. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes, we have 7 wind magic stones. I was about to call them leaf wind magic stones, but that's not quite right. I chose this art because I quite like this art. Sadly, they're not all foil as I would like. I like maximum shiny stuff in my deck. Sadly, I don't have like 7 odd foil wind stones or whatever. Of course, in terms of like a deck, it's essential that we have a little red the pure stone. Oh, my throat is just killing me. I still totally adore this card, mainly for its 200 ability. Oh, my throat. Oh, my throat there. Excuse me. But, yeah, I feel like for this deck, when a lot of this stuff is maybe not as powerful as like you'd see in most aggro decks or something more meta, I feel like the extra 200 is nice. Plus, if we can give 200 from Reflect Refrain, that's like an extra 400 for one Resonator for that turn, which is quite nice. And also, lastly, we're running 2 Magic Stone of Moonlight. The only reason I'm still running these is that because the, which one is it again? The Servant of the Sacred Holy Magical Moon, whatever her name is, her awakening is for a moon. So essentially, we were only really running 2 of these, just on the off chance that we managed to pull off that, not her awakening effect, sorry, her passive effect of, like, paying a moon wheel. Otherwise, I probably would have just replaced it with something else that could probably do this thing. I'm probably maybe going to replace it with a feast, one of them with a feast thing. The magic stone, just because that produces green and it does another thing as well. So I'll probably replace it with a feast thing once I manage to get my hands on one. But yeah, and all in all, that is this Reflect Refrain Elves deck. Let me know, guys, what you thought of it, what you think, and what Reflect Refrain builds you think are like more viable to play, or maybe if you want to like come up with other ideas of stuff, like maybe theming it around Reflect Refrain. I have heard people say that they can they've played like Reflect Refrain were-rabbits or Reflect Refrain werewolves, which is kind of crazy. But let me know, guys, what you thought of this deck profile, and until next time, I will see you all later.